refers to St. John's as the closest thing Canada's got to Dublin. Could you comment on that? How do you feel about being equated with Dublin?
I mean, the closest thing we have to Dublin is absolutely true because we're the furthest east.
Yes. So we got that right.
Outside of that, I'm not really sure how to respond to it. I mean, it's I think meant as a compliment. But I've only been to Dublin once or twice, so I mean, there's no question that I gave a paper in Japan once on the Irish influence on Newfoundland literature. And there is no question that there's a huge Irish influence in Newfoundland. And I think that, I mean, Newfoundland is about a 50-50 split between Irish Catholic and English Protestant. But I like to think of, my sense of it is that the entire culture of the place now is certainly more Irish Catholic in terms of people's attitudes to the world and how they live in the world. It feels to me like that has become the dominant way of seeing things. And I would say in that sense that St. John's is very much like a city like Dublin. But
yeah, I mean, the thing I miss about St. John's, because I don't live there anymore, is that like, you know, I used to go down to the Ship Inn, which is a pub in downtown St. John's, and the great thing about St. John's is it's big enough to have experts in a lot of fields, but small enough that when you're in a bar like that, at the table, you could have like a biochemical geneticist who's doing some cutting-edge research into something. You'd have a scientist who's doing wave theories, you know, how ocean waves affect oil rigs, and you'd have all these experts, including a writer, and then in through the door will come an expert in crime who would, you know, like a shifty guy who would just come up to your table and lift his shirt, and he'd have a styrofoam wrapped T-bone steak wrapped, you know, shoved in his belt and say, "Does anybody want to buy a steak?" And he'd be the expert in shoplifting. So you'd meet all these characters in one night, whereas now in Toronto, like when I moved to Toronto, I suddenly realized, like when I went to a party, everybody else at the party was a writer. And like I wasn't meeting other normal people. And I would go to, you know, I'd say, so people would say, you know, how are you finding Toronto? And I'd say, well, I got a nice little apartment in the basement, you know, when I have a bath, when I dunk my head in the water to put shampoo in it, I can hear the subway. Like, it's interesting. And I told this to a poet, and I could see her like sort of look at that image and like clock it, as writers do. And I said, you know that I'm a writer, like that's my material, like. And she said, "Oh no," she said, "as soon as you say something like that, it's open season." I said, "But like in Newfoundland, all my friends aren't writers. Like we just tell the best stories that ever happened to us, because, you know, but I write them down. I'm the writer." And I said, "So you come to these parties with like your B material, you know, stuff that you're not going to write about?" She said, "Yeah, I would never tell anybody anything that I was going to write." So I was astonished. So in that way, I think, you know, that's the difference there between St. John's and a bigger place like Toronto.